Wherever you are on your leadership voyage, it starts here.
Welcome to Leadership Voyage, another episode of the podcast dedicated to your pursuit of becoming a great leader. My name is Jason Wick. I'm really excited to be here for the third episode of the first season, and my guest in this episode is Dr. Douglas T. Owens. Doug Owens is the F. Ludwig Dean Endowed Chair of Instrumental Music Education, the Graduate Program Director, and a past chairperson of the Old Dominion University School of Music in Norfolk, Virginia. He's previously served as a professor at UMass Dartmouth and University of Southern Maine. Before that, he was an elementary, middle, and high school music teacher. Not only has Doug Owens had an illustrious career as a music educator, but he also has served as a guest conductor, clinician, and adjudicator. He's published research in the Medical Problems of Performing Artists, National Band Association Journal, and The Instrumentalist. And as a performer, he's played in the Portland, Maine Jazz Orchestra and the Virginia Wind Symphony. I think you're going to get a lot out of this discussion with Doug Owens, as he is the consummate, selfless mentor. And in this conversation, we learn a lot about being a strong mentor, listening in that context, and also about finding balance in your own life when mentorship is a passion. Season 1, Episode 3 of Leadership Voyage. I'm here with Doug Owens. Doug, I really appreciate you taking some time today to meet up. We haven't spoken. We just were talking offline before the recording. At least 20 years since we've spoken last, but welcome. Thanks for coming today. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Jason. It's great to talk again ahead of time, and it's certainly a pleasure to learn about what you've been up to, and thank you for involving me.
As someone with a music degree, a music background, and working in the music technology space, you know, Doug, you've been a strong influence on my music development, and I'm really happy and excited to have you here for this discussion. I always thought of you as a strong lead-by-example teacher, and so I'd like to touch on some of that stuff today. But before we do all of that, 40 years almost of professional stuff here, so I'm just going to tick off these boxes. We've got bachelor's and master's of music from University of Colorado Boulder. I've been a band director and director of bands for elementary, middle, and high school in Los Angeles, southeastern Wisconsin, freelance trumpeter in chamber music, theater, jazz, and so on. A doctoral degree in music from University of Northern Colorado. Lead trumpet in the highly touted University of Northern Colorado Jazz Band, and since then, associate professor of music at Southern Maine, conference speaker all over the place, Department of Music chair at UMass Dartmouth, where you taught African American music history, jazz. You're a published researcher, associate professor of music currently at Old Dominion. I don't know, just could go on and on. I am curious, from someone who I perceive as humble, when I read all of these things, what's your reaction to all that?
If I'm honest, the first reaction is it's time to retire. But then I think, you know, that the work isn't done yet. You know, honestly, I'm still passionate about working with students and sending them off on a journey of teaching and learning. And yeah, it's certainly, it's cliche, but it is that lifelong journey. And that's what I think about with that, you know, reading that, because yeah, I was teaching in Wisconsin, you know, years ago, and decided to go back to school to get that concentrated learning again. There were many surprises along that journey in terms of, you know, going to UNC, figuring, okay, I'll work on my, you know, my combo playing, improvisation and whatnot, and finding out, oh, we need a lead trumpet player. And thinking, okay, yeah, I'm almost 40 years old. You sure you want this lead trumpet player? But it was some of the best experience that I could have thought of, being able to, see that level of musicianship and being involved and being challenged to play better, and to just put more time in it. But also, thinking about the other activities since, teaching at the university. I've never have really compared it to teaching in high school, middle school, elementary, except for the fact that you're just working with somewhat different goals in mind. Here, passionate about sending people out so they can teach music, or working with them at a graduate level so they can do the same, or work with the field. Just those challenges of making sure my writing is up to speed, and that continual research areas that I have. I was department chair here for a year also, but honestly, the stress of that job really, after a year, I just said I need to go back to teaching, and I have a less of a administrative role now, directing the grad program. But yeah, a lot of time, a lot of work. When you think that your work can contribute to the bigger picture, then you really get some energy behind that. Working with grad students now, they're always surprised when I tell them, okay, you're finished with your thesis. Now you need to present this at whatever conference, because you've got that background and that experience that you can share with others. And that's what this is about.
If I'm hearing you correctly, at the core purpose is to enable these students to enable more students and share with the community, as you're saying, kind of this cyclical thing, right? I'm curious, you talked about your hand in a lot of pots, or however you want to, analogize that. When you found the stress from the administrative duties, did you find it taking away from the core purpose of what you were trying to do, or how would you characterize that situation? I'm kind of curious.
Well, if I characterize the stress specifically, I had some health issues, related to stress, and there was that. But also, there's a lot of internal challenges at any university in terms of budget, in terms of facilities, in terms of assigning teacher loads, and all of that just seemed very distant from where I was previously. And it was just, you go to sleep thinking about the job, you wake up thinking about the job, and it just, for me, did teach me to stop taking the work home. Trying to fit work into the sphere of work is always kind of that goal for me. And again, extending that to the students, for instance, a new teacher, you try to impress upon them that you can't do everything at once. You may have your vision of where you want this to be, your program to be, but chop it up into small pieces and be happy with the little victories that you have on occasion, and see the joy in your students and what they're able to accomplish. One of the reasons I mentioned it's time to retire is because I'm a bit out of touch in terms of that everyday person in the classroom now. Yes, I go out, I observe, I work with bands, I do all states, but that's not everyday teaching. It is time for someone else to come in and take on some of the roles. I've got about 5 years, so it's all good.
I appreciate you sharing all that, Doug. That's really interesting, thinking about all the different directions you could be pulled, thinking about the learning and the lifelong pursuit, and biting off what you're able to chew, achieving and moving in the right direction with something that's hopefully sustainable, realistic, and all of that. One thing I started thinking about when you said, yeah, I think it's getting close to time to pass the torch, right? Which I actually find a very humble comment to hear someone say about themselves. We haven't worked or seen each other for a long time, but the snapshot in my mind still characterizes you as someone who is extremely competent and extremely humble, how did you come to value humility?
I don't know that it was a conscious effort. I had some good teachers that modeled that for me, and my parents also, of course. When I started teaching, my first job was in California. It was challenging. I ended up leaving after 9 weeks, because of the challenges. But that probably one of those moments where, wow, I am now working for Peter Norton Computing and Pier 1 Imports, not doing what I set out to do. Will I ever do this again? So move to Wisconsin in the Wauwatosa and think, wow, I'm very thankful to have another opportunity to teach. And probably that's when the humility piece started to kick in. When I think of teaching in general, teaching music specifically, it's very easy to get off into the land of competitions and festivals and having that as the goal. But honestly, being able to allow the students to experience, these things, musical experiences, life experiences, whatnot, is to me the most important thing. After this, there's our bass player's coming in. What will happen in that is, he'll be teaching me literally what he does, and I'll observe, but then I'll share a little bit of the styles and the approaches that I hear, and that what other musicians have done over time. Rather than stepping into rehearsal and saying, "Give me that, I'll play it, and you can do this," I'd rather do that behind the scenes, and let's have I won't call it a lesson because that's not where the relationship here, an opportunity to brainstorm. That's what it is. Hopefully he'll leave with some more experience. I mean, there's a piano behind me, so I'll sit and play at that a little bit too, as examples. But all that to say that it's almost as if we have to remind students that it's okay in the classroom environment, especially music, to practice, and to experiment. And yes, sometimes it's going to be not what you want it to be. You may not reach your goals immediately, but keep trying, and let's try it a different way. If you had my philosophy in front of you, you would see on there somewhere that it's doing the best you can for your students.
For those listening who maybe aren't musical, there is a tremendous metaphor still, I think, in so much of what you're talking about. I mean, just the core idea alone of having the courage to put yourself in the slightly uncomfortable situation that's pushing you to get better and try something, and finding a safe place to do that. I mean, that transcends so many things. One thing that I'm just really in awe of listening to you talk about is, you have to have this drive, it seems, to humble yourself too. I guess I'm trying to say this right. You want to be better, so you have to put yourself in situations where you're going to be pushed and not seem very good all the time, which is ironic in a way, right? Now, you're talking about, you went back to graduate school when you were 40-ish, that you have you already had an established career and path. You could have prospered some from financially or however you want to think about that, right?
Sure.
You stopped the whole thing. And even now, 20 some years later, you're playing the bass when it's your 50th instrument at this point. And you're meeting with students, and if I'm hearing you right, you're mentoring each other, kind of. You called it brainstorming, but like you're actually learning from each other.
Oh, absolutely.
And what that gets me to is, how do you define a mentor? Because I heard so much mentorship in these different scenarios you talk about, and I think it's kind of interesting to acknowledge it's not necessarily a one-way street, that we can find this in all kinds of... Could my kids mentor me on Pokemon? Yeah, they could, right? I mean, so,
you know,
how do you define mentorship, or what makes a mentor?
I mean, I would define it as somebody that is willing to, to share and to give time to others without that challenge of ego. This isn't about, the next award or the next trophy, but it is about helping someone out to a certain level. You're right. It can be a two-way street. It could also be something that's not limited to age. It's not always somebody that's older mentoring somebody that's younger. I learned, and I tell them this, I learn from my students on a regular basis. These students will surprise you at the most opportune moments, or the least opportune, I guess, either way. And so the mentoring piece, I always think to myself, if I haven't learned something from a teaching situation, then I haven't set it up in a way for learning. And because to me it's teaching and learning, and that's kind of a two-way thing. Out of the musical context, making time for others, being open to other ideas, I think is huge, and hearing them and not, really taking time to listen to the concerns or the approaches or whatever it is, and being willing to maybe even put those into action and give it a try, and all of that, not necessarily knowing the outcome.
You're giving us a good recipe, I suppose. What do you think it takes to be a good mentor? You're talking about making the time for others, right? I mean, you're talking about separating wanting to share from ego. So making the time for others, being open and listening. And it sounds like this cyclical type of thing. You're not the first. I mean, you're only the third podcast interview I've done, but you're not the first one to talk about the cyclical relationship between a teacher and a student,
Sure.
And how a good teacher is a student, or maybe a good mentor here is a good student. Now, what if for someone who thinks they want to influence others, and what do you have to do to set an effective foundation to be a good mentor?
Well, the foundation is partially the knowledge, I think that's part of it, but I also think part of that sharing of information is also listening. If and this isn't always a student-teacher type of setup, but if take some time to get to know that person or those persons that you're working with. Mm-hmm. If you're presenting at a conference, well, okay, those folks came to you willingly. They connected through the topic. Maybe they know the person that's speaking, but then being able to save that space wherever it is in your presentation to hear concerns or challenges or whatnot that they may be having, I think helps that mentoring relationship. I think of some long-term situations years ago in mentoring new teachers. It was I always approach it from the standpoint of, tell me about your situation, tell me about your what's happening, and what some of your goals are. So you can have a better sense of. I hesitate to say problem solving, because it's not always a problem. There just may be a different way, a different path, and I think most of all is to be willing to. Not necessarily be that person that has the right answer, but has some answers that might help them to develop their own thought processes and directions.
Yeah. Something I learned a few years ago, this is a little semantic, but, mentorship I saw technically defined as, someone who will share their experience to help someone else. And coaching is about asking questions of someone to draw the answers out of them. And it's really interesting to think about maybe there's brainstorming, there's coaching, there's mentoring, and just kind of this awareness of like, okay, you're setting a foundation for yourself as a mentor. You're learning your craft. You've got the right mindset. You want to help others. But then you're also taking whatever philosophy you have, and it's not as much about your philosophy. It's about catering it to the person and their situation, right?
Right. Absolutely. Being aware, sensitive, if you will, enough to understand, or maybe even ask the question: what is the situation? What is what's happening? And of course, in any situation, there's boundaries. Oftentimes, especially as a teacher, you have to know when, okay, the student may need to go see a professional in another area or whatnot. So you have to know those boundaries. At times, you recognize it's kind of like when you're stepping off the podium for a minute and realizing that, okay, they've got this, they understand, the band sounds great. I think it's the same way with any type of mentoring situation. Otherwise, it's just kind of top down. I don't want to be that person that just says, do it this way because I said so. I never excelled in college on multiple choice tests because I just didn't. That wasn't me. But I love to write. I love to give my opinion. But also, I'm thinking about the two students I have right now. They're working on master's thesis projects, and there's always a point where they understand their topic enough where it's just like you need to let them go and then give some feedback. This sounds great. Can you explain your direction in this? And even if there are plenty of times where I may disagree with their approach, but it's like, you researched this, so you own it now, and this is your piece. We have to be able to turn off the switch that says that may say that we want to be in control over everything. We can't control the outcomes. It's not always. There's always something. Again, I'll go back to music performance. We all love a perfect performance, but what is a perfect performance? To me, the perfect performance is one that if something happens, you know how to deal with it.
Yeah.
And you know how to recover from that situation.
There's a resilience.
Yeah. I mean, it's there's so many directions in terms of mentoring. Oftentimes I'll pull music ed students out and I'll say, okay, your turn to conduct and run a chart for us. The last time we did it, one student had a completely different take. And the old me years ago might have said, no, start over again. Let's try it this way. And this time I'm just letting them go and letting them do their thing. And they had reasons for everything that they did. And they were able to get to where I thought they should be in their own way. And that's more valuable. Oh, yeah, for the learner. No doubt about it. Absolutely. There's so much great stuff in this discussion, Doug, and I appreciate it. And I think we have to wrap it up here. I got one last question for you, but I mean, there's just so much to chew on here. So thank you for all these great examples and all these great thoughts. My last question for you: what's something that you learned recently? I probably will always put the global patience on the top of the list. Something specific that I've learned. I'm learning to take some personal time, just to enjoy, everything around me, especially with family and whatnot, certainly important. I would say in teaching, hearing, especially coming out of the pandemic, hearing people's concerns, maybe even without hearing, maybe anticipating that someone may have challenges without them even bringing it up. A lot of times people just don't speak up in class. They need a private opportunity to do so. I wouldn't say that's a recent learn, but that it's been reinforced lately. And then musically, for me, playing the bass is like music theory on steroids. It's all right in front of you. I mean, I've been listening to music all my life, of course, but apparently I've been a closet bassist because I've heard these bass lines and I hear these things and think I can play them. I know I can't, necessarily, but I can certainly try. So Steely Dan bass parts are no joke. Absolutely amazing. I use that to work on my reading. But then getting into Brazilian music, Afro-Cuban music, and thinking of these grooves that exist, oh my gosh, it's just such a different perspective to think from the perspective of the bass player.
Thanks for sharing all those things learned. Dr. Doug Owens, always learning and mentoring at the right time. Appreciate your time today. So much great stuff, and appreciate you coming by.
Absolutely, Jason. It's an honor. I am totally honored that you're including me in your podcast, and it's great to talk and get me to think about these things. I appreciate it.
Wherever you are on your leadership voyage, it starts here.